Welcome to Gatecrashers, a podcast dedicated to kicking open the door to your next favorite thing. Our mission, our creed, and our code is this: to make all things more approachable and accessible to everyone. We want you to find a universe that you'll fall in love with. And speaking of universes, listeners should be familiar with the Detective Comics universe by now, being that that's what we were birthed from. Well, listeners, we've covered one of these giant events before, and it opened with a musical number. But this time, we're actually here with someone who's penning a crisis. Red Sky's death, destruction, trying to make sense of the whole DC multiverse and how at one point it all happened in 5 years. Today, I am once again joined by the current architect of the DC universe, the writer of Robin, Batman, Deathstroke Inc., and now Dark Crisis, Joshua Williamson. How are you?
I am good. How are you doing?
I'm good.
I don't think we operate on the 5-year timeline anymore, though. I don't think we've done that for a while.
I know.
I can't even imagine. Dude, my brain does not function with that timeline.
How does your spine heal that quickly? Like, I am Batman, but like, you don't.
The Robins break it. The Robins break it. There's no way. The Titans and the Robins break the whole 5-year
I never
timeline.
even thought of that. Bruce is just going through kids like a cycle.
I know. Yeah. It does not work. Especially when you start talking about the ages of people and stuff, it doesn't work. Yeah,
that's when it starts falling apart.
I feel like we shouldn't dwell too much on that stuff. I always feel like I said something else earlier where I was like, there is no spoon. There isn't actually a spoon. There isn't actually a timeline we must follow. Now, me as a continuity junkie, I obsess over these things probably too much. But we don't have to be so precious or rigid about it, I guess. Yeah.
I'm a pick and choose kind of person. It doesn't bother me when things don't match up. As long as you're telling me a good story, I don't care.
Yeah.
Now, you've been on the show before, so I don't get to hit you with our hard-hitting journalism. But since then, you've pretty much taken over every book out there. You write consistently. Mm-hmm. Being that you're writing, like your fingers have figured out what the Speed Force formula is, I have to ask, what's your favorite way to unwind? Like when you walk away from the desk, do you play video games? Are you taking walks, music, cooking?
I really like cooking. Yeah, cooking, we have kind of a setup here where I'm cooking 3 nights a week. My wife cooks 2, and then we order out usually 2 nights. Cooking helps a lot. Sometimes I'll go for a walk. That usually helps sort of decompress between the two. Just talk to a friend and vent. But at this point, because of how crazy my schedule is, I don't do much more than write comic books. It's a lot of writing comic books and then a lot of hanging out with my family. It's like one or the other, it's a lot. But I'm able to unwind before I'm with them. I will say this, actually, you know what? This is I'm sorry, I cut you off. I will say the thing that actually helps a lot. Because by the time I leave my office, I immediately have to go into dad mode because I help with the kids. I cook dinner and I cook the kids' dinner. The thing that actually helps a lot is putting my son down for bed. Like when I get we have a whole process with the kids and getting them down. But when I get my son, a lot of times I'm in his room, when we turn all the lights out, we read a couple books together. And then I sing him a song while he's in my arms. There's something about that. I do that every single day, and it's quiet. There's just the only sound is a wave machine, and it's a very peaceful kind of thing. I don't have my phone around me because I'm with him, and I think that moment is actually the reset for the rest of the night. Just having him with me and holding him and reading to him and playing with a little bit before bed. That's the thing that actually clicks me back into being a human. And less just hardcore working all the time. I think that's the real moment where my brain every night goes, okay, cool. And then I come downstairs and I'm like, all right, cool. I'm fully here now. So yeah, that would be probably the biggest click over. Yeah.
Wow, what a wholesome way to open the interview. Right before how we talked about how you killed the whole Justice League. So
yeah, I know. Well, poor Justice League. They're never coming back.
Never. They can never come back. It's a one-time deal.
Oh, so, yeah.
Crises are very special to me because the first series I actually read in floppies was Final Crisis.
Oh, okay.
I know that is a wild place to start.
It is so dense and so involved.
What is your crisis? What is your...
Oh, that's tough. Well, I guess Oh man, all right. I read Zero Hour while it was coming out. I was very already like hooked into DC Comics and going to the store every week. And when Zero Hour was coming out, which is Crisis in Time, with that one in particular, that was the one that I read when it was coming out, so the weekly, and I bought every single one of the Zero issues, like all of them. I bought all of them. So a lot of my thoughts around DC is from that era, that particular time period, but I bought all of that. And I was always addicted to the events. Like I really liked Underworld Unleashed a lot. I've talked to Mark Waid about this a bit. And then when, the build to Infinite Crisis, I think is so good that by the time you get to the actual Infinite Crisis story, the buildup was so great to get there. They've done such a good job with Crisis on Infinite Earths, which I think is probably my favorite one now at this point. Like I read Final Crisis when it was coming out, and I've like once you get past Final Crisis, that's when I'm like pretty much working around DC at that point, But with Crisis on Infinite Earths, I read that when I was in high school. They had finally put out a collection of all of it. Because for a while, like, it was funny when I was doing my research for Dark Crisis, I found there's this Titan story that was tied in with War of the Gods. So it was written by Marv, but War of the Gods was written by George Perez. And there's this page where it's Pariah, and Pariah is talking about what's going on. And it actually is a lot of the stuff that we're doing about Pariah being like, oh, like I'm still basically being punished for this thing I did. I actually think we should destroy everything. Like that's in that story. And he's talking about the darkness coming and all this stuff. There's a small editor's note from Marv in the corner. And Marv is like, tell DC to finally reprint all of Crisis on Infinite Earths in one collection. Like he's basically saying, like, tell DC to do this. The idea that hadn't happened by then is nuts. Like, when you think now about how these things work, where it's like
wild,
it's going to be collected as one big thing. Like we know that that it hadn't been at that time was definitely strange. I know they've done hardcovers of it, but that was not easy to get your hands on. Like even my History of the DC Universe hardcover. There was only like 1,000 of them made. And so it's things like that. Like, but anyway, yes, Crisis on Infinite Earths. I read that one later, and I love that one. I remember when I first read it, it blew my mind. I was like, this is nuts. Like, and now when I go back and I go through it, like that is the work that Marv and George did. I mean, it's nuts. Like that is a laborious work when you really look at it. How much detail, how much story, how many characters, what they were doing. Like, I still think that's probably the best event. Like to me, that's always going to be the event is that one. Yeah. That's why that one will always, at this point, that one is my Crisis more than anything else is that one. That was a long answer for a short question.
Listen, that's why we're here. Now, do you think there are any essential elements to make a good Crisis story? Do you think there's any like themes that all of them kind of include?
Well, I mean, you need to say something about the universe. I think that Crisis on Infinite Earths, they were saying something about the multiverse, but they were also saying about DC characters. And really their goal was consolidating, right? That was a big part of their thing, was consolidating. But they ended up telling a story about this, just all these moving pieces of the DCU, this massive story. Infinite Crisis is really a Superman story at the end of the day. It's about Superman. So with this, I went into it going, I know what this story needs to be about. And if you go back and look at Crisis on Infinite Earths, the first page is, the birth of the multiverse, right? When you go look at Infinite Crisis, the first page is Superman. That's why our first page is about Nightwing and Bruce when he took the vow, and it's really the birth of what I see as legacy and sidekicks, and the idea of like passing the torch and all that. That is such a major piece of the DCU that's why we start there. I think that if you're going into a Crisis, you have to know what it is you have to say going into it, and then you want to
touch on everything and all the different pieces of DCU and all the villains and all the heroes. But you also want to find places for characters to shine that wouldn't normally be seen. Like, it's interesting with Crisis, with Infinite Crisis, because that opens with Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, right? Like, that's how you build an event with the three biggest players. If you go back and look at Crisis on Infinite Earths, I mean, it's like a ragtag crew for a while. It's not all of the main characters, and it kind of bounces around before you start involving those main characters. I mean, obviously Barry and Superman and Batman and Supergirl, all those characters play major roles in it. But when you go back and look at those first couple of issues, it's not just like, here's the Justice League right out the gate. Like, it isn't that. And that's also something I thought about with this, was that, like, I don't want it to be a story about just these characters I've seen before. I want to show them from different points of view. So I think, when you're going into a crisis, you have to do a lot of math ahead of time to figure these pieces out. And you look at the stuff that Grant was doing with the Final Crisis, and Grant was really breaking that mold in some really interesting ways. So that's how I looked at too, was how Grant was playing with the pieces over there.
And now you mentioned it. I had a question about this anyway. With DC embracing legacy a lot more in the past few years, with the return of some big characters, the Batgirls being a thing, stuff like that, does the idea and themes of legacy play into your stories at all? Because I think even toying with it in Robin and some other places.
Yeah, this is, everything I'm doing in DC, from Infinite Frontier, Justice League Incarnate, to Robin and Deathstroke and Batman, all of it is built into this. You look at the stuff with Ra's al Ghul and his thinking about legacy with Damian, all of those pieces, and even something with like Deathstroke and his thoughts on legacy, all of those parts are the story. And, for me, I look at all these different pieces, right? So it's like, all of the characters in Dark Crisis have different points of view on legacy, right? So, like, Deathstroke hates legacy. Deathstroke being the greatest Titans villain of all time, he clearly hates the kids. And so much of it is like the fact that he blames other people for his son dying. It's like, that was your fault, but he can't ever accept that. He'll always end up blaming somebody else, but he always ends up going after the kids. And then there's a frustration in him being like, well, my kids should never have followed in my footsteps. Like, think about this. The moment Deathstroke realizes, if those kids followed in my footsteps, that's a problem. His reaction, because Deathstroke is a nut, is not, I'm a problem. It's, no one should ever follow in anyone's footsteps ever. So he hates legacy, right? Like, Deathstroke is so anti-legacy. Then you have Black Adam, who's very conflicted about the ideas of legacy. You look at Black Adam has had his family taken from him, and the one time there was like a Black Adam family, they died, right? So he's very conflicted about the ideas of legacy. Legacy is a good thing because I have Guy, I have John, and then you have Barry, who is very much a product of legacy. So clearly he likes it, right? And so I wanted to play with all of those ideas of legacy through these different points of view. And then you have Nightwing, and Nightwing is the best example of legacy ever. And so these are the roles these people play. And so it really came a matter of everyone having different points of view on legacy and how they react to that Justice League dying and the idea of legacy stepping up. And that's where a lot of the conflicts, so some of the fun stuff also comes through in the story.
So you did bring up Nightwing. Now, in some of the preview pages, we see that Nightwing is giving a eulogy for the Justice League, a team who he grew up besides. I've heard it said many times that Dick is the heart of the DC universe. He's friends with everyone. What do you think Nightwing's place is?
Everyone turns to look at Nightwing. The moment the shit hits the fan, the moment the Justice League are gone, everyone goes look to Nightwing. And there's a scene later in Dark Crisis. I'm not going to say who the character is, but a character talks to Nightwing. You read issue 1, so some stuff happens issue 1 that's sort of traumatic. Issue 2 has some more of that stuff, and there's some things that go on with. But there's a character, it's a hero, that will probably surprise people, has a moment with Nightwing where they talk about it. And basically that person is like, everyone's looking to you, kid.
and he's like, does he take on that pressure? Because it's different, right? Like when it's his turn to be in charge and it's his turn to kind of step up. This time's a little different than I think in the past. It's not just about taking on the role of Batman. It's about something much bigger than that. And so, yeah, his story is a major piece of this, and the idea of him being legacy. And without getting too much into spoilers, I think some of the stuff we do with Nightwing by the ending will be make a lot of people really happy, and showing how Nightwing is so crucial and important to the DCU and what they represent for the DCU.
Incredible. I'm sad that Jake, my co-host, isn't here because that's his boy. So now I hope everyone's read Justice League 75 by now or has been on any social media whatsoever, because we're sitting with the murderer of the Justice League. Kind of a big deal.
Or Grim Reaper.
Now, you know how important this team how it is important to everyone. Yeah. What did it feel like as a writer being able to go to your editors and be like, hey, I want to kill the Justice League?
That was a really funny conversation. I did not think they would say yes. But I went to them with a story. I went to them with a plan, so it wasn't that hard. It wasn't just like, I think when you do stuff like that, you have to have a plan. And I was able to come and say, this is the plan. This is how this rolls out. Here's where these things come into play. And so, but killing a team is not easy. There's a lot of characters I love, it's like, you've read 75, right? So, it's like Green Arrow and Black Canary are some of my favorite characters of all time. And Green Arrow, I tried to write Green Arrow so many times really early in my career at DC back in like 2009, 2010, 2011, like that time period. I was constantly trying to work on Green Arrow in some form or another, and it never worked. And even when I would get little jobs, I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna put Green Arrow in this. They were like, no, that doesn't make sense. And I was like, damn it. And it's been funny now working in the DCU where I have a lot of the Green Arrow characters. Like I've had Black Canary, I've had Connor, I've had Roy. I haven't really been able to work with Ollie that much. And I think that's part of why Ollie in some ways is like, has more lines than anybody at 75 and has kind of a couple bigger moments throughout, was partially because of that. And that one probably hurt the most of all of it in a lot of ways. But, like my love for Black Canary, it definitely, like making the two of them sort of have their moments across was definitely challenging. And, it was not an easy thing to write, I think, in a lot of ways. But we got there. We got there. It does the job it's supposed to do. And I think when we're doing this interview, it actually hasn't come out yet. It's really interesting to see, there's a scene in the Road to Dark Crisis special where John and Nightwing are talking about what death means in the DCU. And John is freaking out, like, my dad is dead. All these people are dead. And then Nightwing's attitude is very like, that your dad died before, right? Like this has happened before, and Bruce has died before. And he kind of breaks it down for him. And they have this whole conversation about what death means and that Nightwing still has faith. Nightwing is like, they're going to come back and this is what's going to happen, and Nightwing having this kind of just faith in that. And almost is hesitant to even, the part of the conversation is about the eulogy. Mm-hmm. And now people are kind of looking at him to do the eulogy, and he's like, I'm not doing a eulogy. What are you talking about? But part of that was about, I think it's interesting that like some of the more experienced comic readers might be skeptical of this, but then you have other readers who are not as experienced who are like super stressed out about it. And it's been really interesting to see the reaction. So some people being like, oh, it's gonna be okay. And then some people being like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I cannot believe it. They're dead forever. It's very fascinating.
Now, you talked a little bit about death in the DC universe and things like that. Mm-hmm, so I was going to talk about that kind of thematic and things like that, because I had a follow-up to talking about the symbolism of death and that kind of stuff in the DC universe. But more importantly, I just want to know, is Damian okay? Like, this poor kid lost both of his grandpas and his dad.
There's more. You have to keep reading. Well, all right. So some of that stuff we deal with for Shadow War. Because Shadow War it leads directly into Dark Crisis. But there's that scene, in issue 1 where Damian does say, like, my dad is not dead. Like he has that faith, and that we play around with that conflict between him and John throughout the story a little bit of Damien not believing that it's possible. So there's some fun stuff we play with that, but Damien will be okay. Don't worry, my baby boy.
Yeah, I know. I didn't want you to hurt him.
No, I'll take care of my baby.
All right, that's my favorite character. I don't just want him to have a nice day.
Yeah, trust me. There's definitely some big stuff coming for Damien, but it's like, he'll be all right. He's my baby boy. He'll be okay.
You know how excited we were for Robin when we got to speak to you the first time.
I know.
It's been fantastic ever since. Like, it's so nice to have like my favorite kid like every month, and having great stories has been awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, I love writing the book. It's easily the most happiest I've ever been at DC. That's right.
One sidestep from our Dark Crisis. As of right now, Shadow War Batman is out. And at the end of that, we see Bruce go back to Talia.
Oh, yeah.
Is that a power move by you? Like, are you a Talia Bruce guy?
Yeah, I like Talia. Okay. I mean, it gets more complicated as the story goes on, but I like Talia. I like Catwoman too. It's a weird thing because it's not like Bruce is ever gonna. I don't know.
No, he can't be.
He's never gonna pick one, and that's sort of the nature of the story, right? Like, I mean, you never know. Maybe somebody will come along with the story that ends up working out. But I like Talia a lot, and I think that her and Bruce are interesting characters. But there's some stuff that comes up later when it comes to that and that relationship, like Damien's point of view of it. We deal with a little bit of the Omega issue, and then Robin 15. There's a scene where he essentially rips them both up a little bit about the stuff with them. So I think that'll be interesting when we get there. Yeah.
After the first issue, at least I think it was Alpha. I hope he at least gets to punch Bruce once, because like, just
because what Bruce says.
Yeah.
Funny thing about that, I was sort of surprised. I mean, I remember we built that line very carefully. It was funny. I've had different people call me privately to talk about that one line. Because it was built to be like Bruce is stumbling through trying to explain something and says the wrong thing. Yeah. And we come back to that where Bruce basically like corrects himself later. They have a better talk about it. But one time I was talking to Tom King on the phone, and it was right after he read it. He was like, "Man, that was super screwed up what he said." And I remember being like, "Really, dude? Really?"
You?
I was like, "This is because of you, bro." So
this is your fault, Tom.
Yeah.
So with Dark Crisis and all the work you've been doing, so one question: has Dark Crisis been planned since Infinite Frontier, or has this come along?
Yeah, it was called something different, and things have moved and changed. But there's a couple pieces that have moved around. That's just kind of the nature of doing stories and doing comics like this. But we always knew we were going to do this big event this year, and it was going to spin out of the stuff that started in Frontier Zero. Mm-hmm. It was just about getting all these pieces on the table to get here. Yeah.
It's been really interesting, like watching all these pieces get put down. I'm like, that feels like it's built, like that feels like it's going somewhere. And you know what?
There's all kinds of little stuff that I'm curious if people pick up. I think that when I get to the ending, there's a part of me at the end wants to be like, all right, here's how it all connected, and even show you weird foreshadowing things that were built in that people might not have picked up on. There's a couple of like really little visual things that kind of give it all away in some ways that people haven't picked up on. And so I'm curious when I get to the ending if I could be like, oh, this was about this, and you could see the connecting pieces. But I don't want to do it until I get to the ending and then be like, look at this thing we built. Look at all of it together.
Look at this. So before we talk about any more of this, you've made a motley crew of big bads for this gang of darkness who's coming to destroy the multiverse. Have you been planning these members since the start? Like, was this your, like, these are my toys, I want them on the table?
Yeah, you're talking about the Dark Army characters? Yep. Yeah. That came out of a conversation we had about while we were working on Death Metal, of like, I'm obsessed with this idea of like all the big bads sort of teaming up for something, and that visual of them all together. And so I made this list way back then of like, these are the characters I think would be really interesting together. That's part of why Huron is in there, because I said earlier, I love Underworld Unleashed. So I was able to kind of get in there and sort of build this team out. But yeah, that's been the plan for a while. Even with the Upside Down Man, I had approached Rom about it when Rom was still working on Justice League Dark, about like, this is one of the characters, and sort of talking with Rom a bit about it. But yeah, it was always the plan to have this lineup.
It's an interesting grouping, and when the cover came out with like all of them like kind of like doing their like poses and stuff. I was looking at Darkseid, and it looked like he had a belly shirt on, and I was like, oh, that would be cool. But then I started thinking about Darkseid a lot, and he's always man spreading, and he's always got some sort of kilt or skirt. Now, you've written Darkseid enough now that I can ask you this question comfortably. Does Darkseid wear underwear?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe not. I mean, geez. That's interesting. I'd have to really... Does Darkseid wear underwear? Yeah. I think he does. You know why I think he does? Because of the toy. I think if you go back and look at the Superpowers toy, I think he had the skirt too, but he had like an underwear underneath. So I think he wears like trunks. Yeah.
Huh. All right. I
think about it. I mean, I have a couple toys here. Okay, well, hold on. I have a toy here.
Yeah, I have them on the shelf over there, but
which one is that? This is the Mezco one. Yeah, he totally has underwear on here. Oh. This is the Mezco one. Oh, but he totally has underwear underneath his tunic. So I keep
looking at that Mezco one. I'm like, do I need it? Because I have I think he was like a Build-A-Figure at some point. He's like huge.
Yeah, I have that. I have that still in the box, and I have a couple other. I have a mini bust of. I have this mini bust of Darkseid, and then I have a Funko right here. I have this Funko.
He's a great looking character. He's like
awesome.
He's kind of plain. Like he doesn't have all these accessories. He's just like intimidating.
Yeah, that's why partially when we did the design of him, we went back a little more minimal. You know, like you had the new design, and there was a design they had him in post Rebirth, and then we had the design that he was in and just like Odyssey. And so with this, I was like, let's just go back to a very basic, he was designed by the nude version of him was a little bit of Jurgens and a little bit of John Romita Jr., who John Romita Jr. had never drawn him before. The only like closest
ever
they had come to drawing him was in Amalgam. They did like that weird, it's not weird, that book is actually really cool, the Thorion stuff, where it was like Thor and Orion, they had all this Asgard mixed up. There's a Darkseid character in there. I forget what their name is right now. But they did kind of a Darkseid character in there, and that's the closest I think they've come to really drawing Darkseid. So John Romita sort of built this idea of going back to Jack Kirby. That was sort of the goal with that look.
I have my notes are here. I always see him as like a Speedo type of guy for all caps maximum mobility, but
yeah, he wants to be able to move. I mean, the thing with him is, I don't think he cares what anyone thinks about him.
Yeah.
He's
a power sitter.
He knows he's an intimidating figure.
Love him.
It's just kind of like, here I am. Here's all of it.
Now, your dark DC boy band is kind of led by Pariah right now from the OG. Now, you mentioned the Darkness lines from that one tie-in. What made you want to bring him back as kind of like your lead, even though he was more someone who was lost in the sauce of a Crisis?
I think that, when you go back and you look, we were talking about Crisis on Earth, he's kind of the main character of it.
Yeah.
Like, he's in every issue. It's a lot of his POV. He kind of guides you through a lot of it. He's very crucial to that story. But then after that, they're not really used very much. Like, there is stuff, but not really. And then they're barely touched on in Infinite Crisis. They're barely touched on in Blackest Night. And I always thought they were a really interesting character. Their power set. When I was in high school and I was doing like my pitches for DC books that I wanted to do, I had this idea for an Outsiders comic book. This is before the Judd Winnick Outsiders.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this idea for Outsiders comic. I had built this team of Outsiders, and the whole thing was that they were with Pariah. Pariah would always teleport them to moments of cataclysm, but they didn't know where they were going. This team, they would get teleported someplace by Pariah. So I had this idea of it. So I knew a lot about Pariah because of that, being this kid, being like, I have this idea for a comic book, and Pariah is the main piece of it. But I always came around to like, Pariah essentially started Crisis on Infinite Earths and kind of woke up or unleashed the Anti-Monitor, right?
Yeah.
And there's this scene where he explains his origin, and Lady Quark is like, "Wait a minute, like you're responsible for all this?" And she goes to try to fight him, and Uncle Sam stops Lady Quark and is like, "I think he's been punished enough." And to this day, when I read that scene, I'm like, but has he? Like, what? Like, Uncle Sam literally just goes, "Okay, everybody, it's okay." And everybody just buys it.
Yeah,
They're just like, "All right, cool." And yes, he does lead them into battle. He's able to use his powers to bring them to the Anti-Monitor. And, but if you read that story, in that Titans issue, he's still struggling with all of it. The guilt and the, you have to understand, like, this is a person who not only when their world got destroyed because they were careless, because they didn't care about people. They openly talked about this. Like, they did not care about people, and they pushed too far because they had to know the secrets of the multiverse. They pushed too far. Their world gets destroyed. They are trapped in the dark, in limbo for thousands of years. And then they get saved by the Monitor, who then punishes him with this power and gives him these abilities. Pariah has gone through a lot, like a lot, and then is forced to go to each world and watch it die. What does that do to a person?
It's got to mess you up.
And we never really deal with it. Like, the last time Marv touched him is in that story in Titans. We never really talk about that. And so for years, when we would be in summits talking about events, I'd always be like, "What about Pariah? What about Pariah?" Like, I was like the one person who was like super interested in continuing that story. So when it came to be my turn, I was like, "Let's do it, Pariah. Like, we're bringing him in." And being that he's a character connected back to the original Crisis on Infinite Earths that hasn't been used in a major way, it was like a blessing. It was.
You don't have to deal with all the afterwards.
Yeah, it just works. Yeah, it just
There's
works.
always been two characters in that book that I have loved, and even if it's just the design, one is Pariah, and again, you said it hasn't really been used since. And then Psycho Pirate, and Psycho Pirate kind of went off for a while. Great look, great powers, great ideas. Now, dude's in everything, which is awesome.
Oh, yeah. Well,
big win for me.
When I figured out in Infinite Frontier #1, I have that scene where Psycho Pirate and Barry. When I figured out that those two have not seen each other since Crisis on Infinite Earths, I was so happy.
Yeah.
Like, these two characters are so big pieces of DC, and they had this big moment together in Crisis on Infinite Earths. Because Barry was gone, they never saw each other. After that, they never saw each other. Not really. So I was able to do a story of that together and like start bringing them in. But then you have at the end of this is all about coordination too, where it's like at the end of Infinite Frontier, when they say like, "Oh, the second part's leaving," he's like, "I have another event to be in," and then he pops up in Shadows of the Bat. That was because I knew, and I had talked to Mariko ahead of time so that she was able to then carry that piece forward.
I think that may be my favorite thing from all the stuff you've been building. It's just him be like, "Yeah, I gotta go," and then he pops up in his other book, and I was like, "This is awesome." Now he's back with the Bat stuff again, because like somehow he became a Batman character for a long time, and now he's back. I'm like, yeah, good.
Well, because of Tom, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, it was in Arkham. I mean, it kind of makes sense. If you're in Arkham, you sort of get dragged into that kind of stuff.
I just love that guy. So
yeah, me too. I love him, but he'll have a moment here too.
Great. That's all I need to
We'll
hear.
get back to Psycho Pirate.
So we also see Deathstroke in the previews, and you've been writing a lot of stuff for him connected to the character and connecting him in other places. I did want to get a little bit serious about this question in that Deathstroke has crossed the lines of monstrosity not even Joker or any of the likes have. For me, Deathstroke is a villain to the core. And when you're writing him, do you think there is any true redemption for the character?
No.
Good.
Not even a little bit.
Because he's been a character who's been pushed so much in the past, like, couple of years in general. And it's always like, do people know he's a villain or no?
Yeah, well, that's sort of what I was trying to do. Is that like, you know, it was interesting. I did this interview. About that book, and at one point, I didn't outright say it, but I was like, "This is a story about how he is a villain." You know, and it's about him realizing that he's a villain. That's the story. Is him realizing, you know, and he's no longer going to walk the line. There's no anti-hero. There's no like, oh, was he hero? Kind of. It's like, no, this person is a villain, and one of the worst villains in the DCU. Right? That's the story.
Good.
I did an interview, and they made this whole thing of like, is Deathstroke going to be a hero? And I was like, what?
What are you reading? Like,
well, I was like, so that's been a lot of what that book is about. Is like, no, Deathstroke is a villain. There is no redemption here. And what do you do with a character like that? What does he do when he realizes that? Like, what does Slade Wilson do when sort of he starts realizing like, oh, I am a piece of shit? Like, what do you do with that? Does he double down?
Yeah.
You know,
one morning you wake up and you're like, huh, man, I'm a real piece of shit. What am I going to get into today?
Yeah. And how much worse can it get? And it's like, I wanted to do some of that and really put Deathstroke back in the villain category. That's what I was trying to do. And it's like, you know, I think a lot of what Christopher Priest did was about walking that line. But I think Priest had the same attitude that I have of like, he's a villain, but at the time DC didn't want to make that push. So with this story, I'm able to make that push, and there'll be some interesting stuff with him throughout this series, you know, and the stuff that we're doing is Shadow War, but then, you know, a lot of what I'm doing is just putting him through the ringer to make him even more nuts, but it's just painting that picture of like, no, this person is a villain, and there is no redemption. In my mind, there's no redemption that will never come, and not even if anybody after I'm like long gone did that story, I still wouldn't believe it.
Yeah. Good. I like that idea because like
it's
hard for me to like
heroic arc,
because I'm like I read this and like I see him being pushed as like a really cool character, and then the certain event just keeps coming up, and like it was in History of the DC Universe, and I'm like, you can either have him be a villain or you need to get rid of that because like
he's just a villain. Yeah, in my mind, he's just a villain.
So
there's no redemption arc there. There's no hero story. He's just a villain.
So when we spoke last time, it was right at the beginning of Infinite Frontier.
Yeah.
And this question's only for me. I don't give a shit. Who cares? After Cameron Chase being such a large part of a lot of your work, is she going to stay around? Because you know, I love her so much.
Yeah. She's in Rogues, even though that's its own thing. She's in charge of the DEO, and so I think on the stuff that I'm working on, you will definitely see her be in charge of the DEO. I saw somebody else is also using her as in charge of the DEO, and I made me really happy because I think she's a really interesting character, and so I'm hoping that more people use her now as that position. You know, the person that's like not the Nick Fury, because it's not that isn't it, but it's like just that idea of that like this is the person in charge of the DEO and investigating things across the DCU, and that she's skeptical and doesn't trust, but not in the way that Amanda Waller does in her own way. There's a couple things with her in Shadow War that will come up that I think will surprise people. But yeah, I love writing that character. She's a lot of fun to write. That's why she ends up like in almost everything I'm doing in some place. You know, she's in Infinite Frontier. I put her in Batman a bit. She's in some of the stuff with Shadow War later. And again, like she's in Rogues a little bit. So
I'm excited
I like her
Rogues.
character a lot.
Yeah, we spoke last time about her and Resurrection Man, but Resurrection Man's actually in a series right now.
I know.
Do you are there any other characters that you try to kind of sneak into your work as much as you can, other than the Rogues?
I don't even think it's the sneaking in anymore. Now I'm much more overt about it. I don't know. I feel like there's some characters that at this point I would probably get in there, and you'll see some of them in Dark Crisis, but I don't want to ruin those surprises. I always try to find
like the deep dives or things that I just cared about when I was younger. I always try to find stuff like that I think will be fun, or characters I to this day just really like that I can find places for. There's a couple I've thought about without saying yet because I don't know if I'm going to find room for them, but I definitely try to find those characters that I think are really cool, that I like, that are either ignored or haven't really had a fun spotlight. Like if you read Justice League Incarnate, we had this 2-page spread where they go to Earth 13, and part of the fun of that was just me and the co-writer Dennis Culver just trying to find all the magic characters and trying to find it so it'd be like a cool who's who of magic characters in that scene. That was a lot of fun. So I try to find places for that.
So before I let you go,
yeah,
you've answered our other finale question. So I want to ask you another kind of nice one. What's been inspiring you lately? Like any books, TV? What inspires you?
Man, that's a tough question. I think right now, in terms of media, I mean, I'm watching shows like Minx, and I'm watching shows like Winning Time. Those are two shows that I'm watching. I really like both of those. What else have I been watching? I don't watch a lot of TV right now, mostly because of my schedule with the kids and stuff. I'm not able to. I read a lot of comic books. I'm reading a book right now called The Girl on the Train. It's an older book, but one of my wife's favorites, and so I'm reading that right now. I guess I've been going back and just reading a lot of older comics, and I don't want to say what the comics are because that'll probably ruin some things.
Yeah.
But I've been reading a lot of older books and a lot of older comics, and that's been inspiring a lot of stuff in my head. And then just kind of digging deep into my own fandom, right? The stuff that I really liked growing up, the stuff that I gravitate toward this day. So it's the relationship between the characters and just having this opportunity to, say something about those relationships between those characters. I've just been digging deep into that and the stuff that I love and I know other people really enjoy, and trying to find places for those things. I think that's inspiring me more than anything else. Is when it comes to Dark Crisis, I just keep coming up with new stuff for it too, because as I'm working on the issues, I'm just oh, this would be cool if this happened. Oh, I've never seen these two characters talk before. What would happen if these two characters talked? And how would they click or would they not click? Stuff like that's been really fun. Just finding, I don't know, inspiration, looking at the characters themselves and thinking about what they would really do in the situation. That's been really interesting. That's it for, I guess, inspirational stuff. Again, I can't, I'm reading a lot of books, a lot of comics that are a bit older. It would ruin everything I'm doing for the future. I was I'm reading these comics. You'd be oh,
hold on.
Jig is up.
I mean, it's kind of hard to read when you're writing pretty much the entire DC universe.
Well, yeah, and I talked to a lot of people, I got a lot of inspiration talking to, I talked to Scott about stuff, or James, I talked to Matt Rosenberg, and there's a lot of creators I talk to, bounce ideas around with them. I'll talk to Mark Waid and throw some ideas Mark Waid. I got to talk with Phil Jimenez for a bit. Me and Daniel did, the artists on Dark Crisis. We got to talk to
Oh my God. We didn't
Phil.
talk about Daniel. Holy shit.
Oh, we talked about Daniel. Yeah. Amazing. So good.
Before I let you go, I just want to say I got to read number 1. Holy shit.
He's so good.
What a start.
Yeah. It gets better after that too. Every issue, I think they're just leveling it up and figuring stuff out.
It's April. Now I have to wait till mid-June. It's okay. He's
so good and he's so thoughtful and he's such a very good. I use the word thoughtful a lot, where I feel like someone thinks about it when they're doing,
I have his art on my wall.
What's that?
I have a page from his Future State on my wall. The page with
Aquaman?
Jackson and Andy hugging where they're crying.
Yeah.
As soon as I saw it, I messaged him, was hey, can you hold this? Whatever you need to do, I'll pay whatever.
Yeah. Daniel is great. Very just an awesome person, an awesome co-creator. We talk a lot about I talk to them multiple times throughout the week and just what we're doing, and they're very about elevating the story and just trying to hit these beats and make sure we hit these emotions, but the big spectacle of it all. And Daniel is awesome. I mean, I think I'm looking at issue 1 right now, but I think there's scenes in 2 that
are just going to be, they're nuts. And it's like the more and more we go, I think it's like they're able to do all the really big, epic moments, but then also the quiet ones too, right? These kind of moments where it's like, I don't have to put a lot of dialogue in. Huh?
I think those are very important, especially with like dealing with death and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So, Dark Crisis hits shelves on June 7th, so be on the lookout for that. You can call your local comic book shop to add it to your pull. You can make sure to pre-order if you can. If you don't have a local shop, make sure you go to thirdeyecomics.com, who ship internationally. That is our shop, so we always make sure we talk about them. And Joshua, thank you. This was incredible.
Yeah,
it's always a pleasure to talk with you. We'll see you soon.
It's the game.